The clock on his arm hits 0. And the man drops. Not from a bullet, not from a knife. He just expires. In the middle of a crowded bar, music still thumping, glasses still clinking, neon lights flashing like nothing happened. Except everyone sees it. Everyone freezes. Because in this world, time isn't money. It's life. The glowing green digits embedded in every wrist tick down in silent judgment. Minutes, hours, years if you're lucky. When it reaches 0, your heart stops. No warning, no mercy, just darkness. Will Salas watches the body on the floor, jaw tight, beer untouched in his hand. He's 25. He'll be 25 forever. That's the deal. Genetic engineering stopped aging decades ago. You live your first 25 years normally. After that, your clock starts with 1 year, and you earn more time or you die. Simple. Except it's not. Across the room stands a man who shouldn't exist. Calm, well-dressed, and glowing with more than a century on his arm. 116 years. Will can't stop staring. In Dayton, the poorest time zone, people fight for hours. They beg for minutes. This stranger carries lifetimes like pocket change. That's when the tension shifts. A gang moves in. Time thieves, eyes sharp, hands ready. Their leader, Fortis, grins like a predator who's already tasted blood. He's seen the century too, and he wants it. Will feels it before it happens. The air tightening, the music fading under the weight of something violent. He makes a choice in a split-second walk away, or step in. He steps in. He drags the stranger out the back door just as gunshots crack through the night. They run through narrow alleys that smell like rust and sweat, neon signs flickering above broken concrete. Will's lungs burn. The stranger barely breaks a sweat. "Why are you helping me?" the man asks, voice smooth, almost curious. Will doesn't answer. Because he doesn't really know. They hide in an abandoned building. Sirens wail somewhere far off. The stranger studies Will like he's the mystery. Then he says something that lands heavier than any punch. "You don't have much time left." Will checks his clock. A few hours. Not even enough to see the sun rise. "Most people," the stranger continues, "spend their lives trying not to die. I've had enough time to realize that's not living." There's something broken behind his calm, something tired. Morning creeps in pale and cold. Will wakes to silence. The stranger is gone. For one split second, panic slams into his chest. Did the thieves find him? Did he run? Then Will looks at his arm. 1116 years. The numbers blaze bright green against his skin. His breath stops. The stranger transferred all of it. Every second. A lifetime. Just like that. Will stumbles outside, mind racing, heart pounding in a rhythm that feels louder than the city itself. Why? Why give it to him? What kind of man hands over immortality to a stranger in the slums? He finds the answer on a bridge. The stranger stands at the edge, watching the sun rise over a world that runs on borrowed time. His clock is nearly empty now. Seconds flicker. "Time is a gift," he says without turning. "I've had more than my share." Will steps forward. "Don't do this." But the digits hit 0 before he can reach him, and the man falls. Not pushed, not forced. He chose it. He chose it. Sirens scream again, but this time they're closer. Black cars. Armed officers in pristine uniforms. Timekeepers. Led by a man whose gaze could freeze fire. Raymond Leon. He scans the scene. Dead body. Witness. And Will, standing there with 116 years glowing on his arm in the middle of a zone where people kill for days. Leon's eyes narrow. In this world, nobody gives away a century. Nobody. Will feels it then. The shift. The invisible line crossed. He didn't just receive time. He inherited suspicion. A crime he didn't commit but can't explain. And there's something else gnawing at him. The stranger's final look wasn't relief. It was intention. As Leon orders his men to bring Will in for questioning, a single thought pounds through his head. This wasn't random. This was planned. But planned for what? Hours later, after a brutal interrogation and a narrow escape that leaves his heart hammering against his ribs, Will stands alone in his tiny apartment. His mother will finish her shift soon. She works every day just to earn enough time for tomorrow. Every bus ride costs minutes. Every cup of coffee shaves off life. He looks at his arm again. 116 years. More time than his entire neighborhood combined. He could live comfortably, hide, blend in, survive forever. Or he could do something else. Outside his window, the skyline changes in the distance. Tall, golden towers shimmer in New Greenwich, the rich time zone where people are rumored to be centuries old. where no one ever times out, where time doesn't run out unless someone makes it. Will's jaw tightens. The stranger said time is a gift, but gifts can be weapons. And as sirens echo faintly through Dayton and the timekeepers tighten their net, Will makes a decision that will fracture the system itself. He's not going to hide, he's going to spend it. Sirens fade behind him, but the pressure doesn't. Will doesn't sleep. He waits for his mother. The hallway outside their apartment smells like burnt coffee and metal dust. When she finally bursts through the door, breathless from running to avoid another fare increase, her clock flashing just under 2 hours, she forces a smile. "Made it," she says softly. Will grabs her wrist and transfers 10 years. Her digits explode from red to green. She stares at her arm like it's a miracle, like she's afraid it might disappear if she blinks. "Will, what did you do?" "I got lucky," he says. But luck doesn't trigger timekeepers. Within minutes, patrol cars sweep the block. Neighbors peek through cracked doors. Whispers spread. A factory worker with over a century? Impossible. Suspicious. Leon is already building a case. Will knows they can't stay. Dayton is designed to keep people trapped. High toll roads, rising bus fares, walls disguised as economic zones. But with 116 years, barriers become suggestions. He takes his mother's hand and they run. The bus driver laughs when Will offers a month for 2 tickets across the time zone border. "Price just went up," the driver shrugs. Will doesn't argue. He slams a year onto the scanner. The gate opens. Gasps ripple through the passengers. No one spends like that. No one can afford to. They cross into a cleaner district, wider streets, fewer police. But the rich zone, New Greenwich, still looms ahead like another planet. To enter, the toll costs 10 years. 10. His mother's grip tightens. "It's not meant for us." Will looks at the golden skyline. People there don't rush, don't run, don't check their clocks every hour. They sip champagne like time is endless. He pays the toll. The scanner glows. Barrier lifts. And suddenly, silence. No one here hurries. Luxury cars glide past. Women in silk dresses laugh without checking their wrists. Men discuss investments measured in decades. Will feels it immediately. The injustice. Not loud, not violent, just suffocating. Dayton fights for days. Here, they waste years deciding what wine to order. His mother squeezes his arm. For the first time in her life, she isn't counting minutes. But the system doesn't bend without snapping back. Leon reviews surveillance footage. The transfer, the bridge, the toll booths. A poor man moving like he doesn't fear tomorrow. He didn't steal it, Leon murmurs. But he's going to disrupt everything. Because here's the truth. No one says out loud, the system only works if most people run out. If everyone had time, it would be worthless. That night, Will takes his mother to a restaurant where a single meal costs months in Dayton. She laughs nervously at the crystal glasses, at the servers who don't look exhausted. "We don't belong here," she whispers. "Maybe we do," he replies. Across the room, eyes watch him. Philippe Weis, one of the wealthiest men alive, over a century and counting. Owner of time banks, architect of the economic divide. He notices the newcomer who spends years like pocket change but doesn't look like he was born into it. Interest sparks. Outside, flashing red and blue lights suddenly cut through the polished calm. Timekeepers. Leon steps out of the car, coat perfectly pressed, eyes cold. He doesn't storm in, he walks. Patient, confident. Because time is on his side. Inside the restaurant, Will feels it before he sees it. The shift. He stands slowly. His mother looks at him, confusion turning to fear as she spots the uniforms through the glass. "Go," he whispers. "What?" "Go. Now." She hesitates. That hesitation costs everything. Gunshots don't fire. There are no explosions. Just chaos. In the scramble, in the panic of rich patrons who've never felt threatened, his mother runs toward the street, trying to reach him as timekeepers close in from both sides. Her clock flashes red. She spent too much crossing zones, too much living, just for one night of freedom. Will sees it. 30 seconds. He sprints. Traffic roars between them. She runs toward him, tears streaming, digits blinking faster. He screams for her to hold on, to wait, to just 5 seconds. 4. He reaches out. 3. Their fingers brush. 2. "I'm sorry," she whispers. 0. Her body collapses into his arms as cars honk and rich strangers stare in horror at something they haven't seen in decades. Someone timing out. Will holds her, shaking. The city lights blurring through tears he doesn't try to stop. His chest feels hollowed out, carved clean. Across the street, Leon watches, not triumphant, just certain. This is what happens, Leon says quietly to his partner. When people upset the balance, Will lifts his head slowly, grief twisting into something sharper, something dangerous. The stranger on the bridge gave him time for a reason. Now he understands. It wasn't a gift. It was a spark. And standing in the glow of New Greenwich's endless lights, cradling the woman who ran out of seconds because the world decided she was worth less, Will makes a choice that will turn grief into war. If time is power, he's about to steal it back. Grief doesn't make Will weaker. It strips him down to bone. The funeral is quiet. In Dayton, deaths are common. In New Greenwich, they're an inconvenience. But this one echoes. A woman who crossed zones for one night of breathing room and paid with everything. Will stands alone afterward, staring at the glowing numbers on his arm. 115 years. It feels obscene. He replays the bridge in his mind. The stranger's calm. The choice. The intention. This wasn't about escape. It was about exposure, showing him the machine from the inside. And now he's inside. He walks into Philippe Weis's casino like he belongs there. Gold light spills across marble floors. Crystal chandeliers shimmer. The air smells like expensive perfume and false security. Here, people gamble centuries the way Dayton gambles hours. Will buys in with 50 years. Heads turn. A factory worker doesn't carry that kind of time. And he definitely doesn't sit at the high-stakes poker table across from Philippe Weis himself. Weis studies him with mild amusement. "You're new." "Just passing through," Will replies. Cards slide. Faces remain calm. But this isn't about luck. It's about nerve. Each hand climbs higher. 10 years, 20, 30. Gasps ripple softly from spectators who've never seen someone bet with nothing to lose. Because that's the truth. Will already lost everything. One final hand. The pot swells past a century. Silence. Weis leans back. "Careful, son. That's a lifetime." Will meets his gaze. "Not for people like you." They reveal. Will wins. The room inhales sharply as 200 years transfer to his arm. The weight of it nearly makes him sway. Power hums under his skin. He sees it now. The imbalance isn't just economic, it's psychological. The rich don't fear death, so they don't fear anything. Except disruption. Security approaches. Not violently. Politely. "Mr. Elliam." Weis would like a word. Inside a private room, glass walls overlooking the city, Weis pours 2 drinks. "You're angry," he says. "Anger is predictable. Predictable is dangerous." "My mother timed out in your world," Will replies. Weis doesn't flinch. The system must remain balanced. For a few to be immortal, many must not be. There it is. No apology, no shame. Just math. Just math. Just math. Will feels his jaw tighten. You ever watch someone die because they couldn't afford a bus ride? Weis sips his drink. Every society has its cost. Outside, alarms suddenly pierce the calm. Leon. He steps into the casino floor with calculated precision. Word travels fast when centuries move in a single night. He knows Will didn't just gamble for thrill. He's testing something. Testing limits. Will exits through the back corridor. Heart steady now. Not panicked. Focused. This is bigger than revenge. Bigger than grief. He needs leverage. And leverage in this world wears diamonds. That's when he sees her. Sylvia Weis. Philippe's daughter. She stands near a balcony, detached from the glitter around her. Her clock shows decades, but her eyes carry something restless. She's seen the inside of wealth her entire life. Maybe even questioned it. Will approaches. "You don't look impressed," he says softly. She studies him. "You don't look afraid." Sirens wail again below. Timekeepers flood the building. Leon's voice echoes through loudspeakers. "Will Salas, you are under arrest for the murder of Henry Hamilton and theft of time exceeding 1 century. Murder." The word lands heavy. Sylvia's eyes widen. "Is it true?" Will shakes his head once. "Honest. Raw." Footsteps thunder closer. He makes a decision in a blink. He grabs Sylvia's wrist and transfers minutes into her panic-frozen clock, forcing her to run with him toward the emergency stairwell. "What are you doing?" she demands. "Borrowing leverage." They burst onto the rooftop as helicopters circle above. Wind whips across the skyline. Leon steps out from the stairwell behind them, gun steady, expression unreadable. "Let her go," Leon says calmly. "This ends now." Will stands at the edge with Sylvia beside him, city lights burning below like stars trapped on Earth. His arm glows with over 2 centuries. He tightens his grip, not hurting her, but not releasing either. "You said balance matters," Will calls out to Leon. "Let's test it." Leon's eyes flicker to Sylvia. Philippe's empire has a weakness after all. For the first time, the man who enforces time without blinking hesitates. Wind howls, helicopter blades thunder overhead, and Will realizes something chilling. He's not running anymore. He's attacking. With one jump, everything changes. He pulls Sylvia with him off the rooftop, and they disappear into the night. They don't fall far. A lower glass canopy shatters beneath them, spraying diamonds of broken light into the night. Will rolls, shielding Sylvia as alarms erupt again. Closer, louder. Her breath comes in sharp gasps, silk dress torn, palms bleeding. "You're insane," she spits. "Maybe," he says, dragging her up. "But I'm alive." Below, security floods the courtyard. Above, helicopters sweep searchlights across rooftops. Leon's voice cuts through a megaphone, calm as ever. "You can't outrun time, Will." But Will isn't outrunning, he's repositioning. They steal a car. Sylvia knows which keys, which garage, which blind spots the cameras miss. Interesting. She's not as sheltered as she pretends. The engine roars, tires screaming as they blast through the gate before it fully opens. Minutes tick away with every mile. Inside the speeding car, silence hangs heavy. Sylvia stares at him, anger battling something else. "You killed a man for that time." "No," Will says, jaw tight. "He gave it to me." She laughs bitterly. No one gives away a century. He did. He tells her about the bridge, about the sunrise, about a man tired of immortality built on other people's graves. Sylvia listens, arms crossed, but her eyes shift, doubt creeping into the foundation her father poured. Up ahead, flashing lights block the highway. Leon anticipated this. Will swerves onto a service road leading toward Dayton's outer factories. The richer the district, the higher the tolls. Each checkpoint they cross drains years. Not from Sylvia, he's covering her costs, she notices. "Why transfer time to me?" she asks quietly. "Because if you time out, I lose leverage." But that's not the whole truth, and they both know it. They reach an abandoned warehouse straddling zone lines, the invisible scar dividing poor and rich. Inside, rusted machinery looms like skeletons. The air smells of oil and forgotten labor. Will finally releases her wrist. She rubs it, staring at the decades still glowing there. "My father won't negotiate," she says. "He'll let you die before the system bends." Then maybe it needs to break. Footsteps echo. Will spins only to lower his guard slightly. Maya, a childhood friend from Dayton. Sharp eyes, fast hands. She's heard already. Everyone has. A factory worker with centuries kidnapping Weiss's daughter? It's myth-level news. "You're either the bravest idiot alive," Maya mutters, "or suicidal. Maybe both." She tosses him a small device, black market time jammer. Short range, temporary, illegal. This scrambles local scanners. Not for long. Sylvia watches the exchange carefully. "You have allies, people with nothing left to lose," Will replies. But here's the shift. Sylvia steps forward. "You're wrong about one thing." Both of them look at her. "My father doesn't fear losing me," she says softly. "He fears exposure." Silence. Wind whistles through cracked windows. She explains quickly. Time banks manipulate supply. Artificial scarcity. Loans designed to fail. Zones engineered so people always run out just before they can cross upward. It isn't random poverty. It's calibrated. Will feels something click into place. The stranger didn't just want to die. He wanted a witness. Leon's voice suddenly crackles through loudspeakers outside the warehouse. "Sylvia, step out now! This isn't your fight!" She freezes. Will studies her face. For the first time, she looks less like a hostage and more like someone standing at a crossroads. "You can walk away," he says quietly. She looks down at her arm. Decades ticking steadily. Then she imagines Dayton people collapsing on sidewalks while champagne flows uptown. Her jaw tightens. "No," she whispers. "I'm done pretending I don't see it." Gunshots blast through metal walls. They dive behind machinery as timekeepers storm in. Chaos erupts, sparks flying, bullets ricocheting, clocks draining with every second of panic. Will grabs Sylvia's hand, not controlling her now, but pulling her into motion. They sprint deeper into the factory maze. Leon moves with precision, not rage. He doesn't want Sylvia dead. He wants the narrative controlled, a kidnapper neutralized, order restored. Will ducks into a narrow corridor, breath ragged. Dead end, footsteps closing in. Sylvia looks at him. Fear, yes, but also fire. "There's a vault room behind this wall," she says. "Emergency time reserves for executives visiting the district." Will stares. "Break the system," she reminds him. He slams the override panel. Metal doors grind open to reveal rows of glowing time capsules. decades stored like bottled water for the elite. For a moment, no one moves. Then Will smiles for the first time since his mother died. Outside, Leon hears the vault alarm trigger. His expression finally changes. Not anger. Concern. Inside the vault, surrounded by lifetimes meant for the privileged few, Will turns to Sylvia. "Ready to see what happens," he says, voice steady, "when the poor get rich?" And somewhere beyond the factory walls, across every ticking wrist in Dayton, the balance begins to tremble. The vault door seals behind them. Rows of glowing capsules hum softly, each one holding decades, centuries, reserved for men who will never feel a clock suffocating their lungs. The light paints Sylvia's face green. She looks at the lifetimes stacked like trophies. "Do it," she whispers. Outside, Leon's voice echoes through a megaphone. "Will, think carefully. Once you cross this line, there's no going back." Will already crossed it on the bridge. He grips a capsule, heavy in his palm. 50 years. He smashes it into the transfer port. The factory lights flicker. Across Dayton, something impossible happens. Clocks jump. 5 minutes becomes 5 years. Red digits flash green. Workers collapse to their knees, not from death, but from shock. Mothers clutch children. Old men laugh, hysterical, staring at time they never thought they'd see. Inside the vault, alarms scream. Sylvia grabs another capsule, slamming it into the system. "If we're doing this, we do it loud." Years flood the grid. Leon storms forward, gun raised, but he doesn't fire. Because every second he hesitates, more time spills into the streets. The balance. The sacred equation fractures in real time. "You're collapsing the economy," Leon shouts. "No," Will fires back. "We're correcting it." Bullets rip through metal as timekeepers breach the outer wall. Maya covers the entrance, heart pounding, knowing she can't hold them long. Inside, the last row of capsules remains. Sylvia meets Will's eyes. There's fear there, and exhilaration. "After this, there's no returning to my father's world." He nods. "Good." They trigger the final release. Power surges. Screens explode in sparks. The vault drains. And then, silence. In Dayton, sirens are replaced by laughter. Strangers stare at each other in disbelief. For the first time in decades, people aren't running. They're breathing. But revolutions have consequences. Leon steps forward slowly, lowering his weapon. "You think this saves them?" His voice isn't furious anymore. It's almost weary. When everyone has time, prices rise. Inflation hits. The system adapts. It always does. Will feels the weight of that truth. This wasn't the end, just the opening strike. "Then we keep hitting it," he says. More timekeepers flood in. This time, Leon fires. The shot grazes Will's arm. Pain sears. His clock drains a year from the shock impact. He stumbles. Sylvia grabs him. "Move!" They sprint through a side exit as Maya detonates a small charge, collapsing part of the corridor behind them. Smoke swallows the warehouse. Confusion buys seconds. Outside, chaos spreads beyond Dayton now. Reports flood the network. Time spikes. Markets destabilizing. Banks scrambling to freeze transfers. New Greenwich feels it too. Subtle at first, then sharp. Fear. The rich check their clocks more often tonight. Will and Sylvia race toward the zone border again, helicopters slicing the sky above. His arm throbs, digits still high but no longer untouchable. He realizes something chilling. Time can disappear fast when you're fighting. At the toll gate, guards stand frozen, unsure whether to enforce a fee that no longer makes sense. The scanners glitch from the overload. Will doesn't slow down. He crashes through the barrier. Glass shatters. Alarms wail across districts. Behind them, Leon watches the smoke rise from the factory. His jaw tightens, not because of lost time, but because of what comes next. Disorder. Panic. A world where immortality isn't guaranteed for the elite. He touches his own clock, only 50 years, less than the men he protects. And for the first time, doubt flickers. On the other side of the border, Will and Sylvia stop running. The city feels different tonight. Electric, unstable, alive. Sylvia looks at him, hair wild, eyes bright with something dangerously close to hope. What now? Will stares at the glowing skyline of New Greenwich. "We don't stop," he says. "We make them feel it." Sirens swell again in the distance, not chasing, not yet, but gathering. Because when you give the poor time, you give them power. And power never returns quietly. The world doesn't collapse overnight. It trembles. Markets open the next morning in chaos. Time rates spike. Bus fares triple. Coffee costs a week. The system fights back the only way it knows how, by squeezing harder. News screens label Will a terrorist, a destabilizer, A thief who triggered economic panic. But in Dayton, people are smiling. Factories sit half-empty because workers don't have to beg for overtime just to survive the day. Mothers walk their children to school without staring at ticking red digits. For the first time, survival isn't the only priority, and that terrifies the powerful. Will and Sylvia watch it unfold from a cramped apartment above an old watch repair shop. Irony. Tiny gears and broken clocks scattered everywhere. Time dismantled piece by piece. "They'll freeze accounts next," Sylvia says. "My father won't let this spread. He can't freeze what we already gave away." She looks at him. "Then they'll make an example out of you." As if summoned, every screen in the shop flickers. Leon, his face fills the broadcast. Calm. Composed. Will Salas has committed acts of economic terrorism resulting in multiple deaths due to market instability. A pause. He is armed, desperate, and running out of time. Will checks his clock instinctively. 203 years. Plenty. Except fighting drains more than numbers. A knock hits the metal door downstairs. 3 sharp taps. Maya rushes up the stairs, breathless. They're locking down the bridges. Military-grade enforcement. And get this, time loans are being recalled early. People who borrowed years, they owe them back now. Sylvia's face goes pale. That'll wipe out half of Dayton. Exactly. The system adapts. Will feels the rage rise again, hot and sharp. Then we don't just give time, he says. We take it. Sylvia meets his eyes. She understands. Time banks. Central reserves? If they drain those, not in one zone, but everywhere, the artificial scarcity collapses. Completely. It's insane. It's perfect. Night falls fast. They move through New Greenwich dressed in stolen elegance, blending into galas and private events. Wealth hides behind champagne and security codes. But Sylvia knows the codes, knows the architecture, knows where her father keeps emergency centuries untouched by public markets. Inside the Grand Weis Time Bank, marble pillars rise like monuments to greed. Vault doors thicker than prison walls guard lifetimes stacked in silence. Maya hacks the outer grid. 3 minutes, she whispers. Will and Sylvia slip inside the main chamber. Rows upon rows of glowing time capsules pulse like a living organism. This isn't wealth, it's control. Footsteps echo behind them. Leon steps from the shadows, gun raised but steady. No anger now, just inevitability. "You think you're Robin Hood," he says quietly. "But when this collapses, millions will starve." "They're already starving," Will fires back. Leon's jaw tightens. Order keeps people alive. Order keeps them obedient. Silence stretches. For a moment, it feels like the world holds its breath. Then, Leon lowers his weapon slightly. "Walk away. You still have time." Will glances at Sylvia. She nods once. He slams his hand onto the master release. Red lights flare. The vault begins transferring automatically. Mass distribution protocols overriding private reserves. Decades blast into the public grid. Leon fires. The shot hits Will in the side. Pain explodes through him. His clock drains 5 years instantly from the trauma spike. He staggers but doesn't fall. Sylvia screams and tackles the secondary console, locking the transfer at maximum output. Outside, across every district, clocks surge again. This time, not just Dayton, every zone, even the middle class. Even some of the guarded elite accounts glitch under the overload. Leon grabs Will before he collapses completely, their faces inches apart. "You don't understand," Leon growls. "If everyone lives forever, humanity stops moving." Will coughs, blood on his lips. Maybe we finally stop running." The vault alarms reach a deafening pitch. Transfer complete. Every capsule drains. The reserve gone. Security storms in. Sylvia grabs Will, half carrying him toward the emergency exit as Maya triggers a blackout. Darkness swallows marble and gold. Outside, the city erupts. Not in violence, in disbelief. Clocks everywhere glow green. Leon stands alone in the empty vault, staring at the drained chambers. His own clock ticks. 49 years. For the first time, he looks uncertain. In the getaway car, Will fades in and out, Sylvia pressing her hand against his wound. "Stay with me," she whispers. His vision blurs. Time is power. But bleeding reminds him. Power costs. And as helicopters swarm the skyline and governments scramble to regain control, one question burns brighter than any clock. What happens when no one is afraid of tomorrow? Will wakes to the sound of ticking, not his clock. 100 of them. Different rhythms, different lives. The small room around him is crowded. Dayton workers, shop owners, strangers he's never met, all staring, not at his wound, at their wrists. Green. Solid green. Sylvia sits beside him, eyes red but steady. "You were out for 12 hours, she says softly. "You lost 8 years from the surgery. You're down to 195. He exhales a weak laugh. Still rich, but outside, the world is changing faster than anyone predicted. With reserves drained and private banks empty, the artificial scarcity collapses. Prices spike for a day. Then something unexpected happens. They stop rising. Because when everyone has time, no one is desperate enough to pay everything for a little more. The leverage is gone. Factories can't threaten layoffs with starvation. Bus fares drop because people simply walk away. Loans default. Millions of them. But there's no panic in the streets. There's bargaining. In New Greenwich, Philippe Weis watches the markets stabilize without him. His personal accounts are intact, but diminished. Power diluted. For the first time in a century, he is simply wealthy, not untouchable. Across town, Leon stands before a board of officials demanding arrests, crackdowns, restoration of order. He listens, silent. Then he removes his timekeeper badge. "You can't enforce fear," he says evenly, placing it on the table, "when people aren't afraid of dying tomorrow." He walks out. No one stops him. Back in Dayton, Will steps outside for the first time since the shooting. The air feels lighter. Children play in the street without parents checking clocks every minute. An old man sits on a bench, eyes closed, just resting, living. Sylvia joins him. "You didn't destroy the system," she says. "You forced it to evolve." He shakes his head. "We did." She studies her wrist. Decades still there, but now they don't feel like chains or shields, just time. Normal. In the distance, zone checkpoints stand open. Not abolished, just unnecessary. Movement flows both ways. Not in floods, not in chaos. Choice. Maya approaches with a grin. "You two are legends now," she says. "There's talk of decentralized time networks, community banks, transparent supply." Will smirks faintly. "Sounds complicated." "It is," Maya replies. "But it's fair." That word hangs in the air. Fair. Later, as the sun sets over a city no longer divided by glowing fear, Will walks back to the same bridge where everything began. He stands at the edge, watching light ripple across the water. He remembers the stranger's final seconds. The calm, the certainty. Time is a gift. He finally understands. Not because it lasts forever, but because it doesn't have to control you. Footsteps approach. Sylvia slips her hand into his. No guards, no sirens, no countdowns screaming in red. Just the quiet hum of a world adjusting to something radical. Enough. Will looks down at his clock. 19 years. For the first time, he doesn't calculate what it's worth. He just watches the numbers glow against the darkening sky. Not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as possibility. And somewhere, in every zone, people stop running. They start living. Andrew Niccol has always been obsessed with systems. Not just stories, systems. Societies built on rules so rigid, they start to feel like cages. Before In Time hit theaters in October 2011, Niccol had already carved out a niche with Gattaca and written The Truman Show, both films fascinated by invisible structures controlling human lives. So when he wrote and directed In Time, he wasn't just crafting a sci-fi thriller starring Justin Timberlake and Amanda Seyfried. He was building another dystopian thought experiment, this time with the most literal currency imaginable, time itself. The premise alone feels like something only Niccol would dare attempt. In the world of In Time, people stop aging at 25. From that point forward, a glowing digital clock on their forearm begins counting down from 1 year. When it hits 0, they die. Time isn't just life, it's money. You earn it, spend it, steal it, run out, and you're gone. That concept didn't come from a studio mandate chasing trends. It came from Niccol's long-standing interest in inequality and genetic or economic determinism. If Gattaca asked whether DNA defines destiny, In Time asks a sharper question: what if capitalism literally determined who lives and who dies? Columbia Pictures backed the film, with New Regency co-financing, reportedly on a production budget of around $40 million. Modest by sci-fi standards. That figure matters. This wasn't a $200 million spectacle drowning in CGI. It was designed as a sleek, idea-driven thriller, a high-concept film that leaned on allegory more than visual excess. And that choice aligns perfectly with Niccol's style. He's not a chaos filmmaker. He prefers clean frames, minimalist worlds, and dialogue that carries philosophical weight. The spectacle in his films usually serves the concept, not the other way around. Nickel didn't just direct. In Time, he wrote it. That dual role signals something important. This wasn't a hired gun executing studio instructions. This was an auteur project, filtered almost entirely through one creative mind. When a director writes his own script, the result tends to feel cohesive, sometimes even obsessive. And here, that obsession is inequality. The world of In Time is divided into time zones that function like economic classes. In Dayton, people live day to day, literally. In New Greenwich, the wealthy hoard centuries. Crossing zones requires tolls. Time is segregated. Poverty becomes a death sentence measured in minutes. Here's what makes Nickel's vision distinct. He doesn't bury the metaphor. He weaponizes it. There's no subtle subtext whispering about wealth disparity. It's glowing in neon on every character's arm. Some critics argued the allegory was heavy-handed. Fair. But Nickel has never been particularly interested in half measures. His dystopias operate like thought experiments in a philosophy lab. Strip the world down, exaggerate one system, and watch what breaks. Visually, his fingerprints are all over the film's tone. The production design leans into a retro-futuristic aesthetic, vintage cars, sleek modern architecture, minimal digital clutter. It's not the messy neon sprawl of Blade Runner. It's cleaner, controlled, almost sterile in wealthy districts. That contrast feels intentional. Poverty in Dayton is cramped and frantic. Wealth in New Greenwich is spacious and calm. The environment itself reflects time abundance. When you have centuries, you move differently. You breathe differently. Nickel's camera lingers just enough to let that disparity sink in. And casting Justin Timberlake as Will Salas? That's a vision choice too. Timberlake, primarily known then as a pop star turned actor, brings a kind of youthful charisma that fits a man frozen at 25. He looks perpetually young, exactly the point of this world. Pairing him with Amanda Seyfried, whose ethereal presence suits someone born into generational wealth, reinforces the thematic contrast. Nickel didn't cast rugged, world-weary actors. He cast faces that embody the eerie stillness of eternal youth. But beneath the glossy sci-fi hook lies something more political. In Time arrived in 2011, the same year Occupy Wall Street protests dominated headlines. Conversations about the 1% were everywhere. Whether intentional or serendipitous, the film tapped directly into that cultural anxiety. The rich don't just have more in this world. They live longer, forever if they choose. The poor? They scramble for hours. When a character casually pays for coffee with minutes of their lifespan, the metaphor stops feeling abstract. It feels brutal. Nickel's directing style reinforces that brutality through restraint. He avoids melodramatic excess. Deaths happen quietly. A clock hits zero. A body collapses. No dramatic music swell. Just finality. That choice makes the stakes chilling. Time isn't lost in explosions. It drains away in conversations, bus fares, rent payments. Everyday transactions become existential gambles. That's a filmmaker thinking structurally, not just visually. Still, Nickel's ambition sometimes outruns his execution. The film walks a tonal tightrope between cerebral allegory and Bonnie and Clyde-style action thriller. Car chases, shootouts, bank heists, they inject energy, but they also risk diluting the philosophical core. Was that studio pressure for commercial appeal, or Nickel attempting to fuse message with mainstream momentum? Likely a bit of both. Balancing high-concept sci-fi with accessible thrills is never simple. What remains undeniable is that In Time feels authored. Even when it stumbles, it does so in pursuit of an idea. Nickel wasn't chasing franchise potential. He was asking, what does society look like when survival is literally monetized? And more importantly, who benefits from keeping it that way? That question hangs over every frame. And it didn't start with production design or casting. It started on the page. Because before a single glowing clock ticked down on screen, this world had to be written into existence, structured, argued, debated, refined. The blueprint of In Time lies in its screenplay, where concept becomes character and metaphor becomes momentum. And that's where we're headed next. If Andrew Nickel built the philosophical skeleton of In Time, the screenplay is where that skeleton either flexes or creaks. High-concept science fiction lives and dies on execution. A great idea can ignite curiosity, but it's structure, pacing, and character construction that keep an audience leaning forward. And Nickel, writing solo this time, had to translate an almost abstract economic metaphor into something urgent, human, and cinematic. The origin of In Time wasn't adapted from a novel or comic book. It was an original screenplay, born directly from Nickel's imagination. That matters. Original sci-fi scripts are rare in a market dominated by franchises, and rarer still when they attempt overt social commentary. Development reportedly stretched several years before cameras rolled, with Nickel refining how literal he wanted the metaphor to be. Early drafts leaned even more heavily into exposition, explaining the mechanics of time transfer and the economic system in detail. But exposition can suffocate momentum. The final script trims those explanations, instead letting the world reveal itself through behavior. And that choice is crucial. Notice how the film opens, not with a lecture about this society, but with Will Salas living inside it. He works in a factory. He checks his arm. He negotiates for coffee priced in minutes. The rules unfold naturally. You learn by watching transactions? That's disciplined world building. Compare it to something like The Matrix, which pauses to explain its mythology. Nickel takes a leaner approach. He trusts that if you understand money, you understand time in this world. Elegant, efficient. Structurally, the screenplay follows a familiar three-act framework. Act 1 establishes Dayton's desperation and introduces the inciting incident. Will receives over a century of time from a wealthy stranger who's tired of immortality. That transfer isn't just a plot device, it's ideological ignition. Suddenly, Will sees the absurdity of a system where some hoard millennia while others die over bus fare. His mother's death shortly after, in one of the film's most gut-punch sequences, locks the emotional stakes in place. The metaphor becomes personal. Act 2 pivots into something riskier, a quasi-Bonnie and Clyde dynamic. Will enters New Greenwich, kidnaps Sylvia Weis, and the film morphs into a lovers, on-the-run thriller. Bank robberies, hostage tension, chase sequences. On paper, this shift could feel like a betrayal of the premise. Why dilute a potent economic allegory with genre tropes? But here's the strategic calculation. Pure philosophical debate doesn't sell tickets. Movement does. Conflict does. The romance becomes the delivery system for rebellion. The dialogue itself carries Nickel's signature restraint. He prefers declarative lines, clean, almost clinical exchanges. For a few to be immortal, many must die. It's not flowery writing, it's thesis statement writing. Sometimes that directness lands like a hammer. Other times, it risks sounding like a slogan. That's the tightrope. Subtlety versus clarity. Nickel leans toward clarity, perhaps trusting that the concept is already bold enough without linguistic ornamentation. What's fascinating is how the screenplay handles villains. There's no mustache-twirling corporate overlord monologuing about evil intent. Instead, we get Cillian Murphy's Timekeeper Raymond Leon, an enforcer of the system who genuinely believes he's maintaining balance. The script doesn't portray him as corrupt. It portrays him as institutional. He enforces rules because the system demands enforcement. That's smarter than a cartoon antagonist. It shifts blame from individuals to structure. The real villain isn't a person. It's inequality embedded into law. Pacing, though, becomes the script's most debated element. The first act hums with urgency. Every minute literally counts. The second act stretches that urgency into chase mechanics that feel more conventional. Some viewers found that shift exhilarating. Others felt the allegory lost sharpness once guns replaced arguments. Both reactions are understandable. The screenplay attempts to merge two movies, a cerebral dystopia and a pulpy action thriller. That hybrid ambition is bold. It's also difficult to perfectly balance. One of the more clever narrative devices lies in how time transfers are staged. When characters press forearms together to exchange minutes, the act carries intimacy. It looks almost like holding hands. A financial transaction becomes physical connection. That's layered writing. Economics turns tactile. And when time is forcibly stolen, it feels invasive like assault. The metaphor operates on emotional and visual levels simultaneously. The film's climax leans fully into revolutionary fantasy. Will and Sylvia begin redistributing stolen time across lower-income zones, triggering economic chaos. Banks scramble. Systems wobble. It's cathartic, almost fairy tale in its wish fulfillment. Can two people dismantle structural inequality with timed heists? Realistically, no. Dramatically, it satisfies the emotional arc. The screenplay chooses momentum over plausibility. And that choice tells you something about Nicol's priorities. He wants you energized, not just contemplative. Here's where the writing ultimately lands. It's concept-forward, occasionally blunt, structurally disciplined, but tonally hybrid. The metaphor never disappears, but it sometimes competes with genre expectations. Whether that's a flaw or a feature depends on what you wanted from the film. Pure dystopian meditation or a socially conscious thriller with kinetic drive. Either way, the script laid down a foundation sturdy enough to attract a fascinating mix of actors. Because a world this stylized demands performers who can embody youth without innocence, wealth without age, authority without overt villainy. And casting choices like that don't happen by accident. Casting in Time was never going to be about finding actors who looked older or younger. In this world, everyone stops aging at 25. That constraint alone flips the traditional casting playbook. Experience has to be conveyed without wrinkles, authority without gray hair, desperation without physical decay. And Andrew Niccol needed performers who could sell that paradox without the illusion collapsing. Start with Justin Timberlake as Will Salas. On paper, it looked like a gamble. In 2011, Timberlake was still shaking off the pop star dabbling in acting label, despite strong turns in The Social Network and Alpha Dog. He wasn't yet a proven action lead. But that's exactly why the casting works conceptually. Will is supposed to feel like an ordinary guy factory worker, grieving son, accidental revolutionary. Timberlake brings a natural charisma that makes Will sympathetic, but he also carries a slight roughness that prevents the character from feeling naive. There's another layer here. Timberlake's public persona was built around youth slick, energetic, forever 20-something. In a film about arrested aging, that meta quality matters. He embodies the aesthetic of eternal youth without it feeling forced. Yet Niccol doesn't cast him as a glamorous hero. Will is exhausted. He's counting minutes. The performance required Timberlake to strip away pop star polish and lean into physical urgency. Running, fighting, constantly checking the clock on his arm. It's not brute force action, it's desperation-driven movement. Then there's Amanda Seyfried as Sylvia Weis. Casting her was a different kind of strategic move. Seyfried has a delicate, almost porcelain presence on screen, an ethereal quality that makes her seem perfectly suited to someone born into centuries of inherited time. She doesn't look hardened by struggle because her character hasn't been. But as the story unfolds, Sylvia sheds that insulation. The casting hinges on believability of transformation. Can this sheltered heiress convincingly pivot into a rebel accomplice? Seyfried plays that shift not with loud defiance, but with gradual awakening. The chemistry test between Timberlake and Seyfried had to carry the second half of the film. Once the story morphs into a lovers-on-the-run structure, their dynamic becomes the engine. Reports from production suggest that Niccol prioritized natural conversational rhythm during auditions. He wasn't looking for melodrama. He wanted tension that felt like two people from opposite worlds negotiating trust. And when it clicks quietly through shared glances, not grand declarations. Cillian Murphy's casting as Timekeeper Raymond Leon might be the film's most inspired choice. Murphy has a face that can project intensity without raising his voice. He doesn't need to snarl to feel dangerous. And that restraint aligns with how the script treats authority figures. Leon isn't evil. He's methodical, bureaucratic. Murphy leans into that stillness. His performance suggests a man who believes in equilibrium, even if that equilibrium requires casualties. It's chilling precisely because it's calm. Casting Murphy also sidesteps cliché. In a lesser film, the enforcer would be physically imposing, a hulking presence chasing our heroes. Instead, Leon feels like an accountant of mortality. He walks into rooms with quiet confidence, knowing the math favors him. That intellectual threat suits the film's thematic core. Systems, not monsters, sustain inequality. Olivia Wilde's brief but pivotal role as Rachel Salas, Will's mother, adds another fascinating layer. Wilde, only a few years older than Timberlake in real life, plays his mother because of the world's age freeze rule. That dissonance could have been distracting. Instead, it underscores the tragedy. A mother and son who look like siblings, racing against a clock neither can outpace. Wilde's casting required audiences to quickly accept that familial bond without visual shorthand. She does it through emotional shorthand, warmth, urgency, protective instinct. Vincent Kartheiser as Philippe Weis, Sylvia's father, rounds out the upper echelon presence. Kartheiser specializes in controlled arrogance. Think Mad Men's Pete Campbell. Here, he channels that polished entitlement into a man who views time as legacy capital. He doesn't see injustice, he sees order. That subtlety keeps the film from slipping into caricature. Behind the scenes, casting director Denise Chamian had the delicate task of building a world where nearly everyone appears frozen at 25. Extras, supporting players, background characters, all had to visually align with that rule. The absence of visible aging becomes part of the production's texture. It's eerie at first, then normal. And that normalization is the point. No A-list megastars dominate this ensemble. That feels intentional. The concept remains the headline. If a towering celebrity presence overshadowed the allegory, the balance might tilt too far into spectacle. Instead, Nickel assembled a cast recognizable enough to draw audiences, but not so overwhelming that the world bends around them. And once those actors stepped onto set, the theory of casting became reality. Because selecting the right faces is one thing, watching them inhabit these roles, physically, emotionally, rhythmically, is another entirely. That's where performance stops being potential and starts being proof. There's a moment early in In Time when Justin Timberlake's Will Salas sprints through Dayton, seconds bleeding off his arm as he tries to reach his mother before her clock hits 0. No explosions, no orchestral swell, just footsteps, panic, and numbers dropping. That scene is the film's emotional thesis, and it lives or dies entirely on performance. Timberlake approaches Will with a kind of grounded restraint. He doesn't overplay the anguish. Watch his face when he checks his remaining time. It's not theatrical fear, it's calculation. Micro-expressions, jaw tightening, eyes scanning. He plays a man trained by poverty to constantly do math in his head. That subtle behavioral detail sells the world more than any line of dialogue. You believe he's lived like this for years because his body behaves like it. The factory floor scenes establish his baseline physicality. Shoulders slightly hunched, movements efficient. He walks like someone conserving energy because energy equals survival. Then contrast that with his entrance into New Greenwich after inheriting a century. The posture shifts, chin higher, pace slower. He experiments with confidence the way someone tries on a borrowed suit. That transformation isn't loud. It's incremental, and that incremental shift makes it credible. The scene with Olivia Wilde's Rachel, his mother, is where Timberlake proves he understands the film's emotional economy. When she runs out of time in his arms, he doesn't collapse into melodrama. He freezes, shock first, then disbelief. Grief arrives late, like a delayed reaction. It's devastating because it feels real. Panic burns fast. Loss settles slow. He lets that settle. Now consider Amanda Seyfried's Sylvia. At first, she plays her almost like porcelain-controlled gestures, measured tone, a woman raised to believe time scarcity is a myth. There's a slight distance in her early scenes, a softness that borders on detachment. That's intentional. Sylvia has never feared the clock. Why would she? She has centuries. But once Will kidnaps her and drags her into Dayton, something fractures. Seyfried shifts from composed elegance to visible discomfort. She stumbles and heals. She breathes faster. Her eyes dart the way Will's always have. The performance becomes reactive instead of rehearsed. And here's the key, she doesn't suddenly become a hardened rebel overnight. The rebellion feels like curiosity turning into conviction. Their chemistry works because neither actor overpowers the other. Timberlake brings urgency, Seyfried brings awakening. In the hostage-turned-partnership scenes, their conversations carry a flirtation laced with ideology. They're not just attracted to each other, they're drawn to what the other represents. For Will, Sylvia is access. For Sylvia, Will is truth. That tension hums beneath every shared glance. Cillian Murphy, though, operates on a completely different frequency. His Timekeeper Leon is the film's quiet storm. Murphy doesn't chase with rage. He pursues with patience. His stillness becomes intimidating. There's a scene where he calmly explains the necessity of the system, how immortality for a few requires sacrifice from many. He delivers it like someone discussing tax policy, no malice, just logic. That calm rationalization chills more than shouting ever could. Murphy also avoids caricature. Leon isn't blind to suffering, he simply accepts it as structural necessity. In lesser hands, the character might have tipped into villain cliché. Instead, Murphy plays him like a man who sees himself as a guardian of balance. When his own time begins running out late in the film, there's irony, but also tragedy. He becomes a victim of the math he enforced. Olivia Wilde's performance, though brief, leaves a scar on the film. Playing the mother of a man who looks her age requires emotional clarity to override visual confusion. She achieves that through warmth, the way she touches Will's face, the urgency in her voice when discussing bus fares costing an hour instead of 2. She embodies exhaustion without looking aged. That contradiction hurts. Vincent Kartheiser's Philippe Weis deserves attention too. He exudes generational entitlement without raising his volume. His confidence isn't aggression, it's inheritance. He's never been afraid of dying, so his demeanor carries a serene arrogance. Kartheiser understands that the scariest wealthy elites don't sneer. They assume. What stands out across all these performances is restraint. No one chews scenery. No one winks at the allegory. They treat this world as normal, and that normalization makes the concept believable. Acting in high-concept sci-fi requires total commitment to absurd premises. If even one performance feels ironic or detached, the illusion cracks. Here, it holds. Does every emotional beat land perfectly? Not always. Some critics argued Timberlake's dramatic range felt limited in quieter scenes. That's fair. He operates best in motion, running, reacting, pushing forward. Stillness occasionally flattens his intensity, but within the film's propulsion-heavy structure, that forward momentum works in his favor. And here's the truth. Performances don't exist in a vacuum. They're framed, lit, dressed, placed into environments that either amplify or mute them. Acting can be powerful, but production design decides what that power looks like on screen. Because in a movie where time is currency, the world itself has to feel expensive or painfully cheap. A world like In Time only works if its supporting players make it feel populated, layered, alive beyond the leads. Strip away Will and Sylvia, and you're left with factory workers counting minutes, socialites sipping champagne with centuries to spare, and timekeepers policing mortality like traffic cops. The ensemble doesn't just decorate Nichols' concept, they anchor it in texture. Let's start in Dayton, the working-class time zone where survival is measured in hours. The supporting actors playing factory workers, bartenders, bus drivers. They operate with a jittery urgency that becomes atmospheric. Conversations are clipped, movements quick, nobody lingers because lingering costs life. Even background performers glance at their glowing forearms like nervous ticks. That collective behavior builds tension without dialogue. It's ensemble world building through body language. Matt Bomer's brief appearance as Henry Hamilton, the wealthy man who gifts Will a century of time, carries more weight than his limited screen time suggests. Bomer plays him with a kind of exhausted elegance. He's lived for over a century yet looks 25. That contradiction rests entirely in performance. His stillness at the bar, the faint melancholy in his voice as he explains the system's cruelty. It feels less like exposition and more like confession. He's not angry at the system. He's tired of it. That weariness becomes the spark for the entire narrative. Johnny Galecki's Boral, the sleazy loan shark, injects something different, opportunism. Galecki leans into twitchy predation, the kind of guy who thrives in scarcity. He doesn't need centuries, he just needs leverage. His scenes show how even within poverty, hierarchies form. Exploitation trickles downward. The ensemble in Dayton doesn't present a unified victim class, it shows fractures. That complexity keeps the allegory from becoming overly simplistic. Then you have the Minutemen, Alex Pettyfer and his crew functioning as time bandit enforcers. Pettyfer's Fortis is pure volatility, flashy car, aggressive posture. He weaponizes inherited time like a bored aristocrat slumming it for adrenaline. His performance adds unpredictability to the middle act, especially during the high-speed confrontations. Fortis isn't philosophically driven. He's entitled and reckless. That distinction matters. Not all antagonists are ideological. Some are just drunk on excess. In New Greenwich, the supporting ensemble shifts tone entirely. Party guests move slowly, almost languidly. Extras hold champagne glasses like they've never rushed a day in their existence. That pacing contrast becomes psychological storytelling. When you have centuries, you don't fidget, you float. The ensemble understands that physical rhythm difference, and it makes the economic divide visible without a speech explaining it. Vincent Kartheiser's Philippe Weis, as mentioned earlier, embodies generational wealth. But look at how the actors surrounding him reinforce that presence. Boardroom colleagues nod calmly during discussions of time markets, as if debating stock fluctuations rather than lifespan allocation. There's no visible panic in elite spaces. Scarcity is theoretical to them. The collective composure of that ensemble sells the illusion of permanent security. One subtle but powerful dynamic lies in how the film stages crowds. In Dayton, crowds compress. Bodies cluster. People bump into each other, urgency radiating outward. In New Greenwich, space dominates. Wide rooms, open dance floors, fewer people occupying more square footage. The ensemble's spatial awareness enhances that contrast. Supporting actors aren't just filling frames, they're shaping socioeconomic geography. Chemistry across the ensemble feels intentional rather than incidental. The tension between Timberlake's Will and the factory workers isn't adversarial, it's communal. There's shared understanding. Meanwhile, interactions between Sylvia and her social circle carry polite distance. Even before her transformation, she seems slightly misaligned with that world. A choice Seyfried mirrors by playing her early scenes with faint hesitation. And then there's Cillian Murphy again, weaving through both environments. Watch how supporting actors react to him. In Dayton, people stiffen, avoid eye contact. In New Greenwich, elites treat him like necessary maintenance, polite but detached. Those varied reactions amplify Murphy's performance. Authority feels contextual, not absolute. Does every supporting character receive deep development? No. Some function primarily as narrative catalysts, but the film doesn't need elaborate backstories for every role. It needs consistency, and the ensemble provides that consistency by fully committing to the rules of the world. If there's a critique here, it's that a few supporting antagonists, particularly the minute men, veer close to archetype without deeper exploration. They're effective obstacles, but not thematically rich. Still, in a film juggling allegory and action, not every player can carry philosophical weight. What the ensemble ultimately achieves is cohesion. You believe in this society because everyone, from bartender to billionaire, behaves as though time is tangible. That shared commitment gives Nichols' premise structural integrity. And once the actors have inhabited their roles, they need a physical world convincing enough to hold them. A world where glowing clocks, segregated zones, and economic disparity aren't just ideas, but architecture. That's where production design steps in. The genius of In Time's production design is that it doesn't scream future. It whispers it. No flying cars slicing through neon skylines. No holographic billboards cluttering every frame. Instead, production designer Alex McDowell builds a world that feels like tomorrow filtered through yesterday. A retro-futurist aesthetic that keeps the concept grounded rather than cartoonish. Dayton, the working-class time zone, feels compressed. Low ceilings, narrow hallways, factories bathed in industrial gray and muted blues. The color palette leans cold, almost metallic, reinforcing the idea that life here is transactional. Time is manufactured, spent, drained. Even the lighting feels harsher, less forgiving. Shadows fall sharply across faces, emphasizing exhaustion. This isn't dystopia through rubble, it's dystopia through economic design. Now, contrast that with New Greenwich. Suddenly, space opens up. Architecture becomes sleek and modern. Glass, polished stone, expansive rooms with breathing room between people. The palette warms, creams, golds, soft ambers. Wealth isn't just seen, it's felt through spatial luxury. When characters walk through these environments, their footsteps echo differently. Dayton absorbs sound. New Greenwich lets it resonate. That acoustic difference reinforces class separation without dialogue, spelling it out. McDowell made a crucial decision to avoid overloading the film with futuristic tech clutter. The glowing green clocks embedded in forearms are the most overt sci-fi element. Everything else, cars, clothing, interiors, leans contemporary with subtle upgrades. Vintage cars glide through pristine streets. That choice grounds the allegory. If the world looked too alien, the economic metaphor might feel abstract. By keeping the aesthetic familiar, the commentary feels immediate. Look closely at how time transfer technology is designed. When characters press forearms together to exchange minutes, the digital numbers glow bright, almost intrusive. It's simple VFX work, but its minimalism is effective. There are no elaborate devices, no chips inserted into skulls. Time transfer is physical, intimate, invasive. The lack of complex machinery makes the system feel disturbingly plausible. Strip away the glow, and it resembles contactless payment, just flesh instead of plastic. Costume design plays a quiet but powerful role in reinforcing socioeconomic divides. In Dayton, clothing skews practical. Faded fabrics. Simple cuts. Nothing ornamental. People dress for movement and survival. In New Greenwich, wardrobes become tailored, clean, expensive without being flashy. Sylvia's early dresses are structured and elegant, reflecting inherited stability. Once she joins Will on the run, her wardrobe shifts toward darker, more functional pieces. The costume evolution mirrors ideological transformation. There's also something deliberate about the absence of visible aging. Everyone looks 25, but production design subtly compensates. In elite spaces, decor suggests history. Antique furniture, classical art pieces, implying centuries of accumulation. In Dayton, nothing feels old in a curated way. It feels worn. There's a difference. Wear implies use. Age implies preservation. That distinction speaks volumes about who gets to keep time and who merely survives it. One of the film's smartest visual choices lies in how toll booths mark transitions between zones. Crossing into wealth requires payment, not just symbolically, but physically. Gates, guards, architecture narrowing into checkpoints. The environment enforces hierarchy. You don't drift into New Greenwich by accident. You buy your way in. Production design turns abstract class mobility into concrete barriers. The factories where time capsules are manufactured deserve attention too. Industrial lines stamping out units of lifespan like consumer goods. Workers assembling literal days and years. It's capitalism rendered in physical metaphor. The design doesn't exaggerate the machinery. It resembles any modern manufacturing plant. That familiarity is unsettling. Life isn't sacred here. It's product. Visually, the film avoids dystopian decay tropes. No crumbling skyscrapers or graffiti-saturated wastelands. Instead, inequality is sleek, clean, functioning exactly as intended. That aesthetic choice sharpens the satire. This isn't a broken system. It's a working one designed to benefit a few. The environment doesn't look chaotic. It looks efficient. If there's a limitation, it's that some areas of the world feel geographically condensed. The leap from Dayton to New Greenwich happens quickly, and while the visual contrast is strong, deeper exploration of intermediate zones might have expanded the world's texture. Still, within a mid-range budget, the design maximizes impact without bloating scope. Ultimately, production design in Time operates like silent storytelling. You understand class disparity before characters articulate it. You feel tension in cramped spaces and comfort in open ones. You see wealth measured not just in numbers on arms, but in square footage and light. And once those spaces are built, someone has to capture them, frame by frame, shadow by shadow. Because architecture alone doesn't tell the story. The camera decides what we notice. That's where cinematography takes over. The first time you really feel in Time cinematography working on you is during that foot chase in Dayton. The camera doesn't flow gracefully. It runs, handheld, slightly unstable, breathing alongside Will as seconds vanish from his arm. Cinematographer Roger Deakins wasn't behind the lens here. This was shot by heiress initially, and after his departure from the project, cinematography duties were completed by Philippe Weis. That transition alone could have fractured the visual language. Instead, the film maintains a cohesive aesthetic, controlled, modern, deliberately restrained. The choice to shoot digitally using the ARI Alexa system anchors the film in crisp realism rather than glossy futurism. Digital sharpness makes the glowing arm clocks pop against skin tones without overwhelming the frame. The numbers feel integrated, not pasted on, and because the rest of the world is shot with naturalistic lighting, that subtle VFX element becomes eerily believable. It's sci-fi grounded in texture. Dayton is filmed with tighter lenses and closer framing. Faces dominate the frame. Backgrounds blur slightly, compressing space. That compression mirrors the socioeconomic suffocation of the zone. You rarely see expansive skylines here. Instead, the camera stays intimate, almost intrusive. There's an urgency in how scenes are composed. Characters often positioned near the edges of frames, as if the world itself is closing in. Now step into New Greenwich. The camera breathes differently. Wider lenses, more symmetrical compositions, longer takes. The visual rhythm slows down because the characters can afford to. In wealthy spaces, the cinematography becomes steadier, more deliberate. Static shots dominate elegant interiors, reinforcing permanence and stability. The contrast isn't accidental. Movement equals scarcity. Stillness equals surplus. Lighting design plays a crucial role in reinforcing class divide. Dayton scenes lean into cooler tones, steel blues, desaturated grays, giving skin a slightly harsher appearance. In contrast, New Greenwich glows with warm highlights. Golden hues reflect off polished surfaces. Wealth looks literally luminous. That color temperature shift subtly manipulates emotional response. Cold environments feel stressful. Warm environments feel safe. One of the most effective visual motifs is how clocks illuminate skin. In darker scenes, the green glow becomes the brightest element in frame. It's not just a prop, it's a light source. During confrontations, that glow casts faint reflections onto faces, turning time into something almost spectral. Life isn't internal here, it radiates outward, visible, and measurable. Camera movement shifts significantly during action sequences. Car chases are shot with kinetic tracking shots and low-angle mounts that hug the pavement, emphasizing speed without veering into chaotic overcutting. The editing complements this quick, but readable. You understand geography. You feel velocity. The cinematography doesn't rely on shaky cam excess. It maintains spatial clarity. That restraint keeps the film from sliding into generic action territory. There's also a fascinating use of negative space in wealthy settings. Characters often occupy only a small portion of the frame, dwarfed by architecture. It suggests abundance, but also emotional emptiness. Centuries of life, yet rooms feel hollow. Compare that to Dayton, where bodies crowd frames so tightly that personal space barely exists. The visual storytelling reinforces emotional atmosphere without dialogue pointing it out. Night scenes deserve particular attention. Instead of neon-soaked futurism, nighttime and in time feels subdued. Streetlights cast practical pools of illumination. Shadows stretch naturally. The absence of exaggerated sci-fi lighting keeps the allegory tethered to reality. This could be our world, just slightly altered. If there's a critique, it's that the visual style rarely pushes into radical experimentation. The compositions are elegant, controlled, professional, but not groundbreaking. For a concept so bold, the cinematography opts for clarity over visual audacity. That may disappoint viewers craving stylistic extremity. Yet that same restraint ensures the theme remains the focus. What the cinematography ultimately achieves is cohesion. Despite behind-the-scenes changes in camera leadership, the film never feels visually disjointed. Dayton and New Greenwich exist as two halves of the same organism. One starved, one overfed, and the camera language adjusts accordingly. But visuals tell only half the story. Because tension doesn't just live in what you see, it hums in what you hear. The ticking silence, the swelling score, the sound of seconds slipping away. And that's where the audio landscape steps in. Time doesn't just glow in time. It hums. It pulses. It's heard in silence as much as in sound. Composer Craig Armstrong, known for emotionally textured scores like Moulin Rouge and The Great Gatsby, approaches this film with restraint rather than bombast. No overwhelming sci-fi synth walls. No thunderous orchestral dominance. Instead, the music breathes in the spaces between heartbeats. The score opens subtly. Piano motifs. Soft electronic undercurrents. Armstrong builds tension not by announcing danger, but by letting it creep. In Dayton scenes, the music often feels skeletal minimal instrumentation that mirrors economic scarcity. There's a fragility to the arrangements. Strings hover rather than swell. Notes linger and fade quickly, like minutes slipping away. You don't feel musically overwhelmed. You feel exposed. Contrast that with sequences in New Greenwich. The score becomes smoother, more layered, still restrained, but richer in tone. Subtle string harmonies glide beneath elegant party scenes. The music here doesn't signal immediate threat. It suggests permanence, stability. Armstrong mirrors the class divide through orchestration density. Scarcity sounds thin. Wealth sounds full. One of the film's smartest audio choices isn't in the music. It's in the silence. When Rachel runs out of time in Will's arms, the soundtrack pulls back. No dramatic crescendo, no manipulative swell, just breath, footsteps, the faint environmental noise of a city that doesn't stop for grief. That silence is brutal. It forces you to sit in the loss without cushioning it in melody. Sound design plays an equally critical role. The faint digital flicker of the alarm clocks isn't loud, but it's present. That subtle electronic texture becomes psychological background noise. You don't consciously track it, yet it reinforces that time is always active, always draining or growing. In tense moments, especially during time transfers, there's a low, almost tactile hum as numbers shift. The act of exchanging minutes carries sonic weight. It feels physical. Car chases introduce a different audio language. Engines roar, tires grip pavement, but the mix remains clean. Nothing feels overprocessed. The editing allows space between impacts, maintaining clarity rather than overwhelming the viewer with noise. That restraint aligns with the film's broader aesthetic. Even in action, In Time doesn't aim for sensory overload. Diegetic sound. The audio that exists within the story world often carries thematic weight. The ticking of clocks in wealthy homes, the sterile ambience of corporate offices, the chaotic chatter in Dayton bars. Environmental audio shifts dramatically depending on class setting. In poorer zones, sound layers on top of itself, conversations overlapping, machinery clanking, footsteps rushing. In elite spaces, sound thins out, fewer voices, softer echoes. Wealth creates quiet. Armstrong avoids giving Will and Sylvia an overly romantic leitmotif. There isn't a sweeping love theme dictating how you should feel about them. Instead, their scenes often rely on ambient scoring that grows subtly more urgent as their rebellion escalates. That choice keeps the romance grounded in ideology rather than sentimentality. Their bond forms through shared risk, and the music reflects tension more than fairy tale intimacy. The climactic redistribution scenes, when stolen time floods lower-income zones, bring the score closest to catharsis. Strings rise, percussion gains presence. But even here, Armstrong resists triumphant excess. The music swells, yes, but it never fully explodes. It's hopeful, not victorious. There's a difference. Hope suggests possibility. Victory suggests finality. Victory suggests finality. The film wisely avoids claiming the latter. If there's a limitation to the audio landscape, it's that the score rarely imprints a singular, instantly recognizable theme. Unlike, say, Inception's iconic brass motif, In Time doesn't leave you humming. Its strength lies in atmosphere rather than melody. That subtlety fits the film's tone, but may feel understated for viewers craving bold musical identity. Still, the collaboration between score and sound design accomplishes something crucial. It keeps the metaphor tactile. Time isn't just seen, it's felt in quiet rooms and tense exchanges. The absence of bombast ensures the concept remains central rather than buried under orchestral spectacle. But while music and sound shape emotional rhythm, filmmaking is rarely a smooth, uninterrupted process. Behind the clean frames and controlled audio lies a production journey filled with scheduling challenges, creative pivots, and the unpredictable realities of bringing high-concept sci-fi to life. And that story? It's almost as compelling as the film itself. Before, In Time, ever reached audiences debating its allegory, it had to survive the far messier reality of production. And for a mid-budget sci-fi film with ambitious thematic weight, that journey was anything but frictionless. Principal photography began in late 2010, with much of the film shot in and around Los Angeles. That decision wasn't just about convenience, it was strategic. Southern California's architectural diversity allowed the production to double locations convincingly. Downtown industrial zones became Dayton's compressed, working-class streets. Sleek modernist homes and corporate buildings in areas like Century City and Beverly Hills stood in for New Greenwich's insulated wealth. Smart location scouting stretched a reported $40 million budget into something that looked far more expansive. But the production faced a significant behind-the-scenes shift early on. Cinematographer Harris departed during filming, and Philippe Weis stepped in to complete the project. A cinematographer change mid-production can derail visual cohesion. Tone shifts. Lighting strategies clash. Yet the final product maintains a consistent aesthetic, clean, restrained, class-divided in palette and framing. That suggests strong visual oversight from Andrew Niccol and a shared understanding of the film's conceptual spine. When crew transitions don't fracture a movie's identity, it usually means the vision was clearly communicated from the top. The film's action sequences, particularly the car chases, required careful logistical coordination. Unlike CGI-heavy blockbusters, In Time relies heavily on practical stunts. Vehicles weave through real streets, actors physically sprint through city blocks. That grounded approach heightens urgency, but also introduces scheduling challenges. Street closures, night shoots, and stunt coordination demand precision. And because time is such a literal motif, the pacing of these sequences had to visually reflect urgency without becoming incomprehensible chaos. Justin Timberlake reportedly performed many of his own running sequences, which might sound minor until you realize how much of this movie depends on sprinting. Will Salas is constantly racing clocks. That physical repetition risks monotony, so Nickel had to vary environments, stakes, and camera angles to keep momentum from feeling redundant. Behind the scenes, that means careful choreography and stamina, heavy shooting days. Amanda Seyfried, meanwhile, had to navigate tonal transformation on set, shifting from poised socialite to fugitive partner. Costume adjustments mirrored that arc, but performance energy had to evolve organically across shooting days that weren't necessarily filmed in chronological order. That's where directorial consistency matters most. When a character's ideological awakening unfolds across scattered production days, the director becomes the continuity anchor. The glowing arm clocks, arguably the film's defining visual element, posed both technical and performance challenges. Actors had to imagine numbers ticking down in real time, often reacting to invisible VFX markers that would only be added in post-production. That requires disciplined spatial awareness. If a character glances at their arm too late or too early, tension evaporates. Post-production teams then had to seamlessly integrate digital displays onto skin tones under varied lighting conditions, a subtle but constant effects task throughout the film. Editing also became a crucial stage in shaping the final tone. A high-concept script can feel either tight or preachy depending on pacing. Trim too much exposition, and audiences feel lost. Leave too much, and momentum stalls. The final cut leans toward propulsion, especially in the second half, favoring kinetic chase energy over extended ideological debate. That editorial choice likely reflects both creative instinct and commercial awareness. And then there's the cultural timing. In Time, released in October 2011, right in the midst of Occupy Wall Street protests, "We are the 99%" wasn't just a slogan, it was headline news. While the film wasn't a direct response to the movement, its themes of wealth concentration and systemic imbalance suddenly felt ripped from contemporary discourse. Marketing leaned into the high-concept thriller angle: youth, action, rebellion. But the subtext resonated in a way no production team could have fully predicted months earlier. Despite its sleek appearance, In Time wasn't immune to production pressures. Mid-budget films walk a tightrope. They don't have the financial cushion of tentpole franchises, yet they carry bigger expectations than indie projects. Every location day matters. Every reshoot affects margins. And while there were no widely reported on-set disasters, the cinematographer transition alone suggests that creative recalibration occurred behind the scenes. What's impressive is how little of that turbulence surfaces in the finished film. It feels cohesive, controlled, conceptually unified. When production challenges don't bleed into the final product, it's often a testament to strong leadership and disciplined post-production oversight. But even the smoothest production journey faces its ultimate test once the film leaves the editing bay and enters the marketplace. Because ideas are one thing, box office numbers are another. And for a film that literalizes capitalism so boldly, its own financial performance carries a certain poetic irony. Here's the irony. A film about time as currency had to prove its own value in dollars. In Time was produced on a reported budget of around $40 million, a mid-range investment, especially for a high-concept sci-fi thriller with recognizable stars. Not micro-budget, not blockbuster. Right in that risky middle ground where studios hope for smart profit rather than franchise domination. When it opened domestically on October 28, 2011, it debuted with approximately $12 million in its first weekend in North America. Respectable, but not explosive. The domestic total eventually landed around $37 million. That number alone might look underwhelming, barely matching production cost, and that's before marketing expenses, which can double the investment. By traditional Hollywood math, domestic performance suggested modest returns at best. But the global market shifted the equation. International audiences responded far more enthusiastically. Worldwide, In Time earned roughly $174 million. That's the number that matters. International box office accounted for over $130 million of that total. meaning the film found stronger traction overseas than in the United States. High-concept sci-fi often travels well because its themes transcend language barriers. You don't need cultural nuance to understand wealth disparity. A glowing clock counting down your life? Universally comprehensible. The allegory translated. Financially, this placed In Time in a fascinating category. Not a runaway hit, not a flop. A profitable mid-tier success powered by global appeal. It didn't ignite sequel conversations or cinematic universe expansion, but it justified its budget and likely delivered comfortable returns once ancillary markets, home media, streaming, television licensing, entered the picture. Opening weekend placement also matters. The film debuted at number 3 in the US box office, behind established franchises. That positioning signals something important. Audiences were willing to show up for original sci-fi, but competition from brand-heavy properties limited its breakout potential in an era increasingly dominated by sequels and comic book adaptations. In Time represented a gamble on concept rather than intellectual property. Here's where commercial context deepens the story. In 2011, dystopian young adult adaptations like The Hunger Games hadn't yet fully exploded. The appetite for socially conscious genre films was growing, but not yet franchised to exhaustion. In Time arrived slightly ahead of that wave. Had it launched 2 years later, during peak YA dystopia momentum, would it have earned more domestically? Possibly. Timing, fittingly, matters. Marketing leaned heavily on the thriller angle. Trailers emphasized car chases, gunplay, and the Bonnie and Clyde romance dynamic. The deeper economic allegory played more as subtext and promotional material. That strategy likely aimed to broaden appeal beyond philosophically inclined audiences. Sell adrenaline first. Let metaphor be discovered in the theater. And here's the quiet success story: longevity. Films like In Time often find second lives on streaming platforms. The concept is instantly clickable. Scroll past it on Netflix or Amazon, and that premise, hook, time is money, grabs attention. It's digestible. It invites curiosity. That kind of evergreen high-concept premise keeps films circulating years beyond theatrical runs. From a profitability standpoint, mid-budget sci-fi occupying this space is increasingly rare today. Studios now tend to swing either small and indie or massive and franchise-driven. A $40 million original dystopian thriller starring a pop icon turned actor feels like a relic of a transitional era in Hollywood economics. It represents a period when studios were still testing bold ideas without requiring billion-dollar upside. But box office performance doesn't exist in isolation. Numbers tell one story, reception tells another, and sometimes the financial outcome clashes with critical perception. Sometimes audiences embrace what critics question, or vice versa. So how did reviewers respond to a film that dared to equate capitalism with mortality? Did critics see sharp allegory or blunt force metaphor? Did audiences connect emotionally or just enjoy the chase? Because after the opening weekend fades and global totals lock in, a film's long-term cultural footprint depends less on revenue and more on conversation. And In Time sparked plenty of it. Critics didn't dismiss In Time, but they didn't fully embrace it either. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a score hovering around the high 30s to low 40s% range, signaling mixed to negative critical reception. Metacritic paints a similar picture, with a score in the low 50s, right in that gray zone where ambition is acknowledged but execution is debated. Audiences, however, were noticeably more forgiving. CinemaScore reported a B grade from opening night viewers, and IMDb ratings have long floated in the mid to high 6 range. Not adored, not rejected, engaged. The central divide in reviews centered on one question: is the concept deeper than the execution? Many critics praised the premise outright. Time is currency. Aging halted at 25. Economic disparity rendered biological. Even skeptical reviewers admitted the idea itself was sharp. Some compared it conceptually to Nichols' earlier Gattaca, another clean, high-concept dystopia interrogating systemic inequality. But where Gattaca was lauded for its measured, almost poetic restraint, In Time was often accused of choosing action over nuance in its second half. That tonal pivot from cerebral allegory to chase-driven thriller became the primary fault line in critical discourse. Reviewers who wanted a tighter philosophical exploration felt the film diluted its potency with genre mechanics. Car chases, gunfights, romantic outlaw energy? They saw those elements as distractions from what could have been a more surgically precise satire. But here's where the debate gets interesting. Some critics argued the metaphor was too blunt, that equating capitalism directly with mortality lacked subtlety. Fair critique. The film doesn't cloak its themes in ambiguity. The rich lie forever, the poor die young. There's no metaphor decoding required. But others countered that bluntness was the point. Nichol wasn't whispering social commentary. He was staging it in neon digits on human skin. Audience reactions leaned more toward emotional engagement than intellectual nitpicking. The mother's death sequence resonated strongly with viewers. The romantic partnership between Will and Sylvia carried enough chemistry to sustain investment. For many moviegoers, the philosophical weight didn't need to be airtight. It needed to feel urgent. And it did. Cillian Murphy's performance received consistent praise across critical reviews. Even detractors of the film's pacing often singled him out as a standout, measured, compelling, quietly menacing. That kind of consensus performance approval can elevate a film's reputation over time, even if the whole package divides opinion. The film also sparked broader cultural conversations, especially given its release timing during Occupy Wall Street. While not universally hailed as a definitive critique of income inequality, it became part of a larger cinematic trend interrogating systemic imbalance. In retrospect, it feels like an early 2010s snapshot of rising anxiety around wealth concentration, arriving just before dystopian YA adaptations like The Hunger Games would dominate pop culture discourse. Over time, In Time has developed something close to cult appreciation. Not in the midnight movie sense, but in streaming-era rediscovery. Its premise remains instantly compelling. New viewers encountering it years later often approach it without the weight of original critical expectations. Removed from 2011's discourse cycle, the concept feels eerily prescient rather than preachy. There's also a generational factor. Younger audiences raised amid gig economies, student debt crises, and widening wealth gaps may connect more instinctively to the film's thesis than some critics did at release. What once felt heavy-handed can, in a different economic climate, feel disturbingly literal. Still, it's not immune to criticism. Some argue the romantic dynamic softens the film's revolutionary edge. Others maintain that the world-building deserved deeper exploration. And a few feel the allegory sacrifices complexity for clarity. All valid perspectives. But critical scores and audience grades only measure immediate reaction. A film's real endurance lies in what lingers, what themes echo after the credits roll. And In Time leaves behind a question that hasn't aged at all. What would society look like if inequality weren't abstract but biologically enforced? Because beneath the chases and glowing clocks, this film isn't about running out of time, it's about who gets to own it. And that's where its legacy truly begins. Time is the most democratic resource we have. 24 hours a day. 60 minutes an hour. It resets for everyone at midnight. That's the comforting illusion. In Time rips that illusion apart and asks a brutal question. What if time wasn't evenly distributed? What if it was hoarded, inherited, weaponized? At its core, In Time isn't about glowing forearms or futuristic toll booths. It's about inequality made visible. Andrew Nichol takes capitalism's quiet mechanics, wages, debt, interest rates, and translates them into biology. You don't just struggle financially in this world, you age into desperation and die because of it. The metaphor isn't subtle, it's surgical. For a few to live forever, many must run out. That line echoes beyond the script. Its thesis, its accusation. The film's most enduring theme is scarcity versus abundance. In Dayton, people rush because they must. Movement is survival. In New Greenwich, stillness reigns because time surplus removes urgency. That contrast becomes psychological commentary. When survival isn't guaranteed, ambition becomes frantic. When survival is endless, morality becomes optional. The wealthy in Time don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as stable. That's the sting. Systems rarely look evil from the inside. There's also a generational thread running quietly beneath the action. Sylvia inherits centuries she didn't earn. Will inherits nothing but debt and risk. The film interrogates the idea of legacy, not just financial, but biological. Who gets a head start? Who begins the race already exhausted? That question hasn't faded since 2011. If anything, it's intensified. And then there's rebellion. The second half of the film leans into redistribution fantasy. Two young rebels siphoning hoarded time back into the hands of the desperate. Is it realistic? No. Revolutions rarely hinge on romantic duos with good aim. But as allegory, it works emotionally. The sight of time flooding into Dayton, numbers climbing instead of draining, it's catharsis, not policy proposal. Catharsis. Does the film overextend its metaphor at times? Yes. There are moments when the bluntness edges toward oversimplification. Real-world inequality is tangled in systems more complex than a glowing clock. But clarity has power too. By stripping the issue down to minutes and seconds, the film forces confrontation. You can't abstract away a countdown hitting zero. Within Andrew Niccol's filmography, In Time sits comfortably alongside Gattaca as part of his ongoing exploration of structural control. It may not reach the quiet emotional precision of Gattaca, but it shares the same intellectual DNA. Clean frames. Big ideas. Individuals pushing against deterministic systems. If Gattaca whispers about genetic fate, In Time shouts about economic fate. Its legacy isn't built on awards or critical consensus, it's built on concept longevity. The premise remains instantly compelling. Scroll past it years later and you still pause. That's durability. In an era where dystopian stories flooded the market, In Time carved out its own lane by literalizing capitalism instead of cloaking it in fantasy kingdoms or post-apocalyptic wastelands. Rewatchability depends on what you value. If you crave airtight political nuance, you may find it uneven. If you appreciate high-concept allegory delivered with kinetic energy, it holds up. The performances remain committed. The world-building stays cohesive. The metaphor hasn't expired. Here's my verdict. In Time is not a flawless film. Its tonal shift from philosophical dystopia to action romance divides attention. Some character arcs could dig deeper. The allegory occasionally trades complexity for clarity, but its ambition outweighs its imperfections. It dares to turn an economic conversation into a biological one. It dares to visualize inequality as a ticking clock on skin. And that takes nerve. In a landscape saturated with safe franchises, In Time stands as a reminder of what mid-budget original sci-fi can do, provoke, entertain, and spark conversation without needing a cinematic universe behind it. It may not live forever in the cultural canon, but, fittingly, it doesn't need to. It just needs to keep being rediscovered. Because every generation that watches it asks the same uncomfortable question: if time is money, who's stealing yours? Good. Then we go deeper. We're no longer just analyzing a movie, we're dissecting its philosophy. Time in Time isn't just money. It's labor theory made flesh. The film's economic allegory works because it strips capitalism to its skeletal frame. In Dayton, people earn time through work. That time pays for rent, food, transportation. Wages fluctuate. Prices rise overnight. Suddenly, the bus costs 2 hours instead of 1. Sound familiar? Inflation isn't discussed through news broadcasts or policy speeches. It's felt in panic. A mother can't afford the commute. She runs. She dies. That scene isn't just emotional tragedy. It's commentary on systemic precarity. When margins are razor-thin, even minor economic shifts become lethal. The working class in Time doesn't lack skill or effort. They lack buffer. They live minute to minute because the system is calibrated to keep them there. And Niccol makes that calibration explicit. Cillian Murphy's Timekeeper explains it calmly. If too many people have too much time, the system collapses. Think about that. The film proposes that scarcity is engineered, not accidental, not natural. Engineered. The wealthy aren't immortal because they're superior. They're immortal because the economy is structured to extract lifespan upward. Time flows like capital concentrated at the top, drained from the bottom. It's trickle-down economics inverted. Nothing trickles, it accumulates. And here's where the allegory sharpens. Unlike money, time cannot be stored without moral consequence. Hoarding dollars is abstract. Hoarding centuries means someone else is dying earlier. The film makes wealth visceral. Philippe Weis doesn't just sit on assets. He sits on human years, generations worth. That's why the metaphor hits harder than standard dystopian class divides. In many sci-fi worlds, inequality is aesthetic. Bigger houses, better clothes, cleaner air. Here, inequality is biological. You watch people collapse when their clock hits zero. No ambiguity, no metaphorical distance. Some critics called it simplistic. But simplicity is power when it removes excuses. You can't rationalize a system where a coffee costs 15 minutes of existence. The film also engages quietly with labor value. Workers manufacture time capsules in factories. They literally produce lifespan for others. It's Marxist imagery without quoting Marx. The proletariat generates the resource that the bourgeoisie hoards. Except here, the resource is life itself. The metaphor isn't hidden, it's glowing green. But there's a deeper layer most viewers don't immediately clock. The age freeze at 25. Why 25? Because it's the cultural apex of youth. Physical prime, marketable beauty, maximum productivity. The world of In Time commodifies youth the same way modern culture does. Nobody ages past their peak. Aging, once a sign of wisdom, has been eliminated. Experience exists without visual markers. Authority isn't older, it's just richer. That creates an eerie psychological undertone. A society without visible aging is a society without visible legacy. Parents look like siblings. Generational hierarchy becomes invisible. And yet, inheritance persists. Wealth passes down silently while faces remain frozen. That visual stasis mirrors economic stagnation at the top. The rich don't need to change. They don't age. They don't evolve. Stasis becomes privilege. Meanwhile, the poor are trapped in kinetic survival, running constantly, movement as necessity. The cinematography reinforces this. Dayton moves. New Greenwich floats. The body language difference becomes economic theory expressed through posture. There's also something disturbingly relevant about the toll zones. Mobility requires payment. You cannot cross into wealth without sacrificing lifespan. Social mobility isn't impossible. It's just priced high enough to discourage it. That reflects real-world gatekeeping through education costs, housing barriers, and generational capital. The film doesn't just ask who has time. It asks who controls movement. Now let's address the redistribution fantasy at the end. Will and Sylvia don't destroy the system. They disrupt liquidity. By flooding lower zones with stolen time, they create temporary imbalance. Banks scramble. Markets wobble. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The film stops before systemic overhaul. We never see long-term consequences. Does inflation spike? Do elites recalibrate? Does scarcity simply reset? The movie ends on hope, not policy. And that's intentional. Because In Time isn't an economic blueprint, it's an emotional provocation. It wants you to feel injustice more than it wants to diagram reform. And in that sense, it succeeds. Because once you've seen someone die over bus fare, abstract debates about minimum wage feel different. This is where the film matures on rewatch. In 2011, it felt like sharp social commentary. In the mid-2020s, amid widening wealth gaps, gig economies, burnout culture, and conversations about time poverty, it feels almost prophetic. People today don't say, "I don't have money," as often as they say, "I don't have time." Burnout is modern scarcity. And In Time literalized that a decade early. But economics is only one layer. There's also psychology. What does immortality do to human motivation? What does living day-to-day do to empathy? How does urgency shape morality? Because when survival is measured in minutes, your brain rewires. And that's where we go next. Good. Now we leave economics behind and move into something even more unsettling. What does this world do to the human mind? Immortality sounds like a gift, until you remove urgency. In Time, the wealthy don't just possess centuries. They behave differently because of it. When survival is guaranteed indefinitely, motivation mutates. Risk becomes recreational. Fortis and the Minutemen don't steal time because they need it. They steal it because they're bored. When death is distant, danger becomes entertainment. That psychological shift matters. Scarcity creates focus. Abundance can create apathy. Look at how New Greenwich characters move. Slow, deliberate, almost anesthetized. They've outlived friends. Decades blur together. When time stretches endlessly, consequence dulls. Even Philippe Weis doesn't rage or panic. He operates with serene entitlement. Why rush? There's always tomorrow. Contrast that with Dayton. People there don't have the luxury of existential reflection. Every decision carries weight. Every purchase subtracts lifespan. The brain under that kind of constant pressure doesn't plan for 50 years. It plans for tonight. Urgency shapes identity. You become reactive, survival-driven. It's not that the poor lack ambition in this world. It's that the system shrinks their psychological horizon. That's one of the film's sharpest insights. Poverty compresses time perception. Modern psychology actually supports this idea. When people experience economic instability, cognitive bandwidth narrows. Short-term decisions dominate. Long-term planning becomes a privilege. In Time visualizes that phenomenon with brutal clarity. Dayton residents don't dream about retirement. They dream about making it to morning. Now consider something even darker. What happens to empathy when inequality becomes normalized? In New Greenwich, no one gasps at the idea that millions die young. It's statistical background noise. When suffering becomes structural, it becomes invisible. Timekeepers like Leon enforce equilibrium because imbalance threatens order, not because imbalance is unjust. Stability replaces morality. And here's the twist. Leon isn't cruel. He's convinced the system prevents chaos. That's psychologically terrifying, because it mirrors real-world institutional logic. Bureaucracies rarely see themselves as evil. They see themselves as necessary. The film understands that power often hides behind procedural calm. But let's examine Will. Will experiences both scarcity and sudden abundance. That transition is crucial. When he inherits a century, he doesn't immediately become reckless. He becomes curious, testing how the other side lives. The psychology of upward mobility plays out subtly. There's discomfort in wealth at first. He doesn't know how to move slowly. He doesn't know how to stand still without anxiety. That anxiety lingers even when his clock is full. Trauma doesn't evaporate with surplus. And that's realistic. Economic mobility doesn't instantly erase scarcity mindset. People who've lived in survival mode often retain that urgency long after circumstances improve. Timberlake's physicality captures that. He still moves like someone who expects time to run out. Sylvia, on the other hand, experiences the opposite transformation. She moves from abundance to exposure. For the first time, she feels a ticking clock without safety net. And what happens? Her moral awareness expands. Scarcity humanizes her. The psychological distance between classes narrows once she feels risk personally. The film implies something radical. Empathy often requires vulnerability. As long as Sylvia was insulated by centuries, injustice felt theoretical. Once she risks running out, it becomes urgent. That's not just narrative convenience, it's commentary on privilege. Now, let's talk about immortality itself. The film never romanticizes it. Henry Hamilton, who gives Will his time, is exhausted. He's lived long enough to see the system for what it is. Immortality hasn't given him fulfillment. It's given him perspective and boredom. Eternal youth without purpose becomes hollow. There's a subtle existential layer here. Mortality gives life intensity. Remove death, and meaning blurs. In that sense, In Time becomes almost philosophical. It asks whether urgency is necessary for value. If you can live forever, what motivates growth? If you can't die, what defines a lifetime? The poor experience too much urgency. The rich experience too little. Balance disappears at both extremes. And here's another psychological ripple. Trust. In Dayton, transactions are tense. Loans carry threat. Every exchange feels loaded. When time is literally life, trust erodes. Community becomes fragile. Scarcity doesn't just create stress, it creates suspicion. Meanwhile, in New Greenwich, trust appears stable because risk is minimal. Wealth cushions betrayal. The film quietly suggests that inequality doesn't just distort economics, it distorts relationships. And perhaps the most chilling psychological idea? Children stop aging at 25. Imagine a society where no one visually grows older. No gray hair to signal experience. No wrinkles to signal wisdom. Authority becomes detached from biology. Leadership becomes wealth-based rather than age-based. That subtle design choice reinforces the film's thesis. Longevity is purchased, not earned. But here's the limitation. The movie touches these psychological dimensions without fully excavating them. We glimpse existential fatigue in Henry. We glimpse ideological rigidity in Leon. But deeper exploration of long-term immortality's mental toll could have elevated the film from sharp allegory to full philosophical meditation. Still, the seeds are there. And when you revisit the film years later, those psychological undercurrents feel stronger than the gunfights. The action sequences age normally. The existential questions don't. But what about the paths the film didn't take? What alternate directions could this concept have explored? Where did it pull punches? Where could it have gone darker? Because with a premise this rich, There are always roads not taken. And that's where we head next. Now we step into the uncomfortable territory. Because In Time had the bones of a masterpiece, and it chose restraint instead of extremity. The most obvious road not taken? Moral complexity. Imagine if Will, after redistributing time, accidentally triggered inflation so severe that Dayton spiraled into chaos. Imagine if flooding the system caused prices to spike, scarcity to recalibrate, and new hierarchies to form. The film hints that balance is delicate, but it doesn't explore systemic backlash. It ends on momentum, not consequence. That's emotionally satisfying. But philosophically, it's safer. A darker version of this story might have shown revolution as messy, unstable, morally ambiguous. Instead, In Time frames redistribution almost like a heroic montage. Banks panic, the poor gain time, fade out. The machinery of capitalism doesn't visibly reassert itself. That's cinematic optimism. But it sidesteps the complexity of entrenched systems. Then there's immortality. The film introduces a world where people can live for centuries. That concept alone could sustain an entire psychological drama. What happens to marriage when you might live 400 years? What happens to memory? To identity? Do you outgrow yourself? Henry Hamilton hints at existential exhaustion, but the narrative moves on quickly. We don't sit in the weight of a 105-year-old mind trapped in a 25-year-old body. That's a movie inside this movie. Another missed depth lies in generational tension. If parents and children look the same age, how does authority function within families? How do you visually distinguish lineage? The film uses this primarily for shock. Olivia Wilde playing Timberlake's mother, but doesn't mind the sociological implications. In a society without visible aging, status becomes purely economic. That's fascinating territory left mostly untouched. And then there's Leon. Cillian Murphy's Timekeeper could have been the film's most complex figure, a man enforcing a system he knows is flawed, yet believes is necessary. What if we saw cracks in his faith earlier? What if he witnessed systemic cruelty and wrestled with doubt? Instead, his arc remains consistent until the end. Strong, controlled, principled, compelling, yes, but the concept allowed for even greater moral fracture. There's also a tonal fork in the road the film never fully commits to. Is this a dystopian tragedy or a populist action fantasy? It flirts with both. The first act leans bleak. The second leans kinetic and rebellious. Neither approach is wrong, but fully embracing one might have elevated it further. Imagine if the film stayed in Dayton longer. Let us live inside that panic. Let us see multiple families collapse under rising inflation. Let us feel systemic suffocation before escape arrives. The emotional impact could have deepened. Or imagine the opposite. Lean fully into stylish dystopian heist energy. Heighten the outlaw romance. Stylize redistribution like a cyberpunk fairy tale. Push aesthetic audacity further. Instead, the film walks the middle path, grounded enough to be serious, energetic enough to entertain. Sometimes that balance broadens appeal. Sometimes it blunts impact. There's also the global question. The film focuses almost entirely on one geographic economic ecosystem. But what about the rest of the world? Are there nations where time regulation differs? Black markets operating internationally? Time cartels? Political movements? The premise is so expansive that its contained setting feels intentionally narrowed for budget and focus, but it leaves you imagining a much larger mythology. That's both strength and frustration, because the idea is bigger than the runtime. Now let's talk about fear. A truly ruthless version of In Time might have shown what happens when someone rich runs out of time publicly, not in a quiet corner, not off-screen, but in the middle of New Greenwich. Panic, shock, the illusion cracking. The film gives us Leon's final moments, but it doesn't destabilize elite society as dramatically as it could have. Revolutions are terrifying to those in power. We don't quite see that terror ripple outward. And finally, there's the emotional intimacy question. The romance between Will and Sylvia works structurally, but a deeper psychological exploration of their trauma could have added layers. Will loses his mother because of the system. Sylvia loses her worldview because of him. Those are seismic shifts. The film touches them, but doesn't linger long enough for scars to fully form. None of these are fatal flaws. They're signs of contained ambition. Because here's the truth. In Time is conceptually fearless, but narratively cautious. It presents a radical idea. Then it packages that idea inside a recognizable genre frame to ensure accessibility. That's not compromise, it's strategy. But when revisiting the film years later, you can't help imagining the version that pushed even harder. The version that stayed darker, longer. The version that asked, what if overthrowing the system costs more than we're ready to pay? Still, the restraint is also why the film endures as mainstream sci-fi rather than niche philosophical cinema. It invites viewers in, rather than challenging them out. And that leads to a bigger conversation. Where does In Time sit within the evolution of dystopian storytelling? How does it compare to the genre waves before and after it? Did it influence anything, or was it overshadowed by louder franchises? Because context shapes legacy, and legacy is about placement in history. Let's zoom out. Now we zoom out. Because no film exists in isolation, especially not dystopian sci-fi. When In Time arrived in 2011, dystopia was on the brink of mainstream explosion, but it wasn't fully dominant yet. The Hunger Games wouldn't hit theaters until 2012. Divergent was still 2 years away. The YA dystopian wave hadn't peaked. That timing matters. In Time sits in a strange transitional pocket of sci-fi history. It's post-Matrix, post-Gattaca, post-Minority Report, films that fused sleek futurism with philosophical anxiety. But it's pre-YA franchise dystopia, before rebellion narratives became industrialized. That gives it a distinct identity. It's not built around prophecy, not centered on chosen one mythology, no rigid faction system, no love triangle as primary engine. Instead, it's economic dystopia. That's rare. Most dystopian films externalize oppression through authoritarian governments or violent regimes. In Time does something subtler. The system isn't overtly tyrannical. It's procedural, legal, calm. The police are called timekeepers, not soldiers, not enforcers. The oppression is economic infrastructure. That aligns it more closely with films like Elysium, 2013, which would arrive 2 years later with a similar class separation thesis. Wealth floating above poverty, literally and figuratively. But In Time, beat it to the punch in translating inequality into biological stakes. You could also trace a lineage back to Fritz Lang's Metropolis, workers below, elites above, life divided by architecture. Except Nickel modernizes the allegory. No giant machines crushing laborers, no expressionist spectacle, just glowing numbers and price hikes. Clean dystopia. What makes In Time distinct in the genre evolution is its scale. It's not apocalyptic. The world hasn't collapsed. Civilization functions smoothly. That's key. The system works exactly as intended. That design choice separates it from chaos-driven dystopias. This isn't about survival after disaster. It's about surviving within prosperity. In that sense, it's closer to Black Mirror episodes than to large-scale franchise storytelling. High concept. Socially reflective. Slightly ahead of its time in tone. If In Time had been released in the streaming era, marketed as a prestige limited series, it might have been received differently. The concept almost begs for episodic expansion. But theatrical sci-fi in 2011 was shifting towards spectacle and IP dominance. Original high-concept, mid-budget projects were becoming rarer. In Time represents one of the last waves of studio-backed original dystopian thrillers before the franchise era fully tightened its grip. And here's the fascinating part. It influenced conversation more than it influenced filmmaking. You don't see direct cinematic descendants copying its time as currency mechanic, but you do see increasing narratives about commodified existence, streaming series, exploring gig economies, sci-fi about lifespan extension for the rich, tech dystopias about productivity tracking. The thematic territory expanded across media. In hindsight, In Time feels like an early 2010s anxiety snapshot. Pre-crypto boom, pre-AI labor panic, pre-pandemic burnout crisis, yet somehow anticipating all of them. And that's where its legacy quietly strengthens. Because dystopian films age in one of two ways, they become obsolete or they become prophetic. In Time leans toward the latter. In 2011, I Don't Have Time felt like a casual complaint. In the 2020s, it feels existential. Hustle culture, productivity metrics, side gigs, digital surveillance of labor output. Time has become monetized more aggressively than ever. Not biologically yet, but culturally. The film's premise now feels less like exaggerated metaphor and more like satirical compression. Still, it never reached franchise status. Why? Because its strength is its singularity. The concept is elegant but self-contained. Stretch it too far, and the metaphor risks thinning. Unlike The Hunger Games, which builds an expansive political rebellion arc, In Time focuses tightly on one economic lever. That precision makes it memorable, but not sequel-hungry. And perhaps that's fitting. A film about resource concentration shouldn't become bloated. Now here's the final layer. Where does it sit in Andrew Niccol's career? Gattaca remains his most critically revered work. The Truman Show, which he wrote, remains culturally iconic. In Time exists between those achievements and his later projects like Anon. It's arguably his most commercially visible directorial effort after Gattaca, even if not his most critically praised. But thematically, it's pure Niccol. Systems. Control. Identity shaped by invisible frameworks. Individuals rebelling not against villains, but against architecture. If you trace his career as a through line, In Time isn't an outlier. It's continuation. And when you place it within dystopian evolution, it stands as a bridge film between intellectual 90s sci-fi and franchise-heavy 2010s dystopia, between theatrical mid-budget risk and streaming-era concept storytelling. It may not dominate greatest sci-fi lists, but it occupies a very specific, very interesting space in genre history. And now, one last question remains. How does In Time feel today, fully recontextualized in the mid-2020s, in a world obsessed with productivity, automation, wealth gaps, and lifespan extension technology? Because sometimes a film's final form isn't revealed at release. It's revealed years later. Now we arrive at the most important question. How does In Time feel today? Not in 2011, not in the shadow of Occupy Wall Street. Now, mid-2020s, post-pandemic, post-burnout culture, mid-AI acceleration, hyper-productivity era. And the answer is uncomfortable. It feels closer. In 2011, the film's premise felt like stylized allegory, time as literal currency, life measured in glowing digits. Extreme, exaggerated, dystopian. A clever thought experiment. In 2026, it feels like compression. Today, people don't just sell labor. They sell attention. They sell availability. They sell responsiveness. Your time is tracked through productivity apps, calendar metrics, wearable devices, digital dashboards. Corporate language talks about time optimization, efficiency blocks, output hours. We haven't embedded clocks in forearms. We've embedded them in culture. I don't have time has become a class indicator. Some people can afford leisure. Others monetize every waking hour. Gig workers live algorithm to algorithm. Salaried professionals blur boundaries between work and life. Burnout becomes a badge of participation in the system. Scarcity isn't fictional. It's normalized. And then there's wealth concentration. In the mid-2020s, global wealth inequality has widened significantly compared to the early 2010s. Billionaires add billions in weeks. Housing costs climb. Medical debt cripples. Retirement feels abstract for many under 35. In Time no longer feels like it's warning about a future. It feels like it's simplified the present. The movie's most haunting line, "For a few to be immortal, many must die," reads differently now. Not as literal immortality, but as resource monopolization. When wealth accumulates infinitely upward, opportunity contracts downward. The metaphor ages disturbingly well. Now consider lifespan extension technology. In 2011, anti-aging science was fringe curiosity. In 2026, biotech companies openly pursue longevity research. Billionaires fund age reversal experimentation. The wealthy discussing extended lifespans no longer sounds purely sci-fi. In Time suddenly intersects with real conversations about who would access such breakthroughs first. If life extension became viable, would it be evenly distributed? History suggests otherwise. The film's premise, immortality for the wealthy, doesn't feel absurd anymore. It feels like a plausible future scenario wrapped in thriller packaging 15 years early. But here's the deeper reason the film hits harder today: exhaustion. Modern audiences understand time poverty intimately. Not just financial scarcity, but emotional depletion. Endless notifications. Always on culture. Productivity as identity. The psychological compression explored in Part 1-4 now mirrors lived experience. Dayton isn't just the poor, it's anyone living calendar to calendar. New Greenwich isn't just the ultra-rich, it's anyone insulated from urgency. The divide feels less geographic and more structural. Rewatching the film today, the action sequences feel secondary. The metaphor dominates. The chases still entertain, but the economic mechanics now command attention. You notice the bus fare scene differently. You feel the inflation spike differently. You hear Leon's justification differently. In 2011, it was dystopian logic. In 2026, it sounds like policy debate language. That's legacy, not cult status, not Oscar wins, not meme saturation, relevance. And here's the final evolution. When the film ends with redistribution hope, younger viewers today might react with skepticism rather than catharsis. We live in an era where systemic change feels complex, slow, contested. The fantasy of two rebels redistributing wealth may feel symbolic rather than plausible. But symbolic stories matter, because they keep moral questions alive. So where does In Time ultimately land 15 years later? It stands as a high-concept dystopian thriller that dared to literalize economic anxiety before it became mainstream cinematic currency. It's not flawless. It doesn't dive as deeply as its premise allows. It balances philosophy with accessibility instead of surrendering fully to either. But its core idea? Still sharp, still unsettling, still ticking. And that might be the most fitting legacy imaginable for a film about time. Because the true test of In Time was never opening weekend numbers. It was whether its metaphor would expire. It hasn't. If anything, it's aging into relevance.